Hi everyone, I hope I'm live. It's always hard to tell. It looks like I am. I'll just turn my phone down. Thanks to the people who sent in questions for today already. And then if anybody has other questions, if you've joined in, please just put them in the chat and I'll hopefully find them and get to them. All right, so today's questions. The first question came from Bob, and let me just find it. So thanks, Bob. It was a great question. Bob said, "Good morning, Sue. A question for this afternoon. A friend of mine likes eating red meats, but cuts as much fat off as possible. My question is, has fat got more added value on its own? I love it any which way. But cutting off the fat, does it detract from the purpose of eating red meats?" You're doing a great job, so you can include this statement in your question if you choose, because it's true. Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate your support, and that is a great question. And I made up just a quick little slide to share with you, if I can do that. Just because you did send your question in early enough for me to do that. So let me just go to my slideshow. All right. So got a little quiz for you. We're told to avoid red meat because of its saturated fat. So my question to you is, which of these foods has the most saturated fat? Red meat, eggs, oily fish like mackerel or salmon, lard, nuts and seeds, olive oil, or low-fat milk? So I want you to think about that for a moment. I'm sure you will realise it's probably a little bit of a trick question. So I'm sharing a slide from the wonderful Zoe Harcum. And Zoe's done a lot of work looking into this. So this slide shows us the total fat per grams and the amount of saturated fat per grams per every 100 grams of food. So here we have a 100-gram piece of sirloin steak, and we can see that there are 7 grams of total fat, and 2.1 grams of that total fat is from saturated fat. So that means that, 4 point something grams of fat is coming from monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fats, those fats that they keep telling us we should be eating. Let's have a look at eggs. So he's got 4 eggs there, which must make up 100 grams. And in eggs, we have 10 grams of total fat, 3.1 grams of saturated fat. Once again, saturated fat is not the majority of fat in eggs. Now, we're always told to eat oily fish. This is really good, got great omega-3 fatty acids in it, and it's supposed to be super good for our health. Well, here's 100 grams of mackerel. That's got 14 grams of total fat and 3.3 grams of saturated fat. So that's a lot more than what the red meat has that we're told to stay away from because it's too high in saturated fat. Now let's look at the lard. Here's 100 grams of lard, so that's just pure fat, and that's got 39 grams of saturated fat. So that means that most of the lard is made up of, 60% of the lard is made up of other fats other than saturated fat. Here's the almonds. Here's 100 grams of almonds, 51 grams of total fat, 3.9 grams of saturated fat. And then we look at the olive oil. 100 grams of olive oil has 100 grams of total fat, just like the lard, it's pure fat, and it's got 14 grams of saturated fat, okay? So it's got way more saturated fat than our red meat has. And then we've got low-fat milk, which has 1 gram of fat and 0.6 grams of saturated fat. So the question that I asked you was which one of these was the highest in saturated fat, and it turns out that it's the olive oil, and the low-fat milk is the lowest. So when we're looking at olive oil, people will say, well, you're not going to eat 100 grams of olive oil in one sitting, but you'll eat 100 grams of steak. And that's probably quite true. But in 100 grams of olive oil, it's got 14 times more total fat than red meat, 17 times more saturated fat than red meat. So 1 tablespoon of olive oil, which is 20 grams, which, is what you're likely to use, has got more saturated fat in it than eating a pork chop. So where did all this sort of come from? Well, it's come from this Ansel Keys, it's come from our whole demonization of saturated fat. But we've also got Dr. Stephen Gundry out there, who's a really smart guy. I think he's a cardiologist, he's a physician, and he's written so many books now on the plant paradox and longevity books and all sorts of books. And I agree with a lot of what he says in his books, but he's very anti-red meat and he's very pro-olive oil. And what he says, one of his quotes is, food is how we get olive oil into our body. And he advises us to drink at least 1 litre of olive oil each week because of its health properties. But that's the equivalent amount of saturated fat to eating 17 steaks, And I don't know if he's kind of taken that into account. And I really delved into this a few years ago when my genetic test came back for my risk for Alzheimer's disease. So, as many of you know, I've got the ApoE44 gene, puts me at a high risk of getting Alzheimer's disease over the next, few years. And I really wanted to look at my diet and how I could mitigate that risk. And of course, along with the risk of Alzheimer's disease is a risk of heart disease. So it's like, what's going to be the worst of the two evils? And so I really looked into what kinds of fats I should be eating. And that really highlighted to me that all this advice to consume olive oil, I'm just basically pouring saturated fat down my throat, exactly the same as if I was out there eating 17 steaks. The other thing I want to point out about Dr. Stephen Gundry is that he produces and sells his own brand of special olive oil. You can buy it in New Zealand and it costs $187 a litre. So I do wonder if there may be some commercial interests behind his advice. Anyway, to carry on about the fat, Bob, there are within saturated fat a whole lot of different kinds of fat, and I won't delve into them too deeply because it's kind of a bit meaningless and a bit complicated. But we have palmitic acid, stearic acid, all sorts of other kinds of fats, versions of saturated fat. They've all got different different lengths of carbon chains, and they have very good healing properties in our body. So they can be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, depending on which fat it is. And so you might worry, if it's inflammatory, that's not good. But what it does is it helps our immune system with an inflammatory response when we need it. They have anti-inflammatory properties. They carry hormones. They make our sex hormones, so we must have fat to make sex hormones. And, for all us women out there who are going through menopause or, we really need good quality fats to make those sex hormones. And when we're trying to lose weight and we're trying to go low fat and we're eating all these vegetables, we're often not doing ourselves a lot of good. And then these fats carry, just get back to my Facebook if I can find it, just see if there are any questions. These fats carry vitamins and minerals. Said the live at the end, that's weird. These fats carry vitamins and minerals, or vitamins, I should say. So vitamin A, E, D, and K, or the fat-soluble vitamins. So they carry them around our body. And sorry, I'm a little bit distracted because I've lost my. Says that my life has ended. All right, still going. Okay. Just check the comments. Oh, Stephanie, you did really well. You figured out it was the olive oil. Good work. Well done. Yeah, so these fats carry vitamins A, D, E, and K around the body. So they're really important. And the other thing that they're really important for is our brain function. And our brain really needs fats. It needs really good quality fats. And we need them for neurotransmitter function. So a lot of us, we're out there, we're trying to make changes in our lifestyle and our diet. We want to eat differently, and, we embark on a program, and then all of a sudden we just fall off the wagon and we just wonder what's wrong with us. Like, why can't I do this? What's wrong with me? I've got no willpower. I've got no sticking power. And what we need to be able to make these changes is to have really good neurotransmitter function. So we need to have good levels of serotonin and dopamine and GABA and glutamate and all these other neurotransmitters that help consolidate those changes that we want to make in behavior. So if your brain isn't getting the nutrients that it needs, if it's not getting the fatty acids that it needs, our neurotransmitters are not going to be working properly. And so we can go out there and, do all the positive thinking that we want, and it's still going to be really hard to make those behavior changes. So that's another good reason to really focus on those fats. What else did I have there? Oh, just a note to be careful of eating fats and carbs together. And this is where we've been getting into trouble in our diets over the last, 50 years, because we've learned how delicious it tastes to put something with sugar and something with fat together and mix it up and basically eat it. I remember when I was a kid, I don't know if my cousin will like me sharing this, but anyway, when I was a kid, my cousin and I, when we would get together, we would often, want to bake something so we could mix the butter and the sugar and the eggs together, and then it would never get in the oven. We'd just sit there and eat it like pigs. And it's just that addiction to that sugar, fat, and carbs together. So just be careful, about putting too much butter on your potato and things like that. All right, thanks, Bob. That was a wonderful question. My next question is from Leanne, and this is a really good question as well. And I'll just go and find her question. Gosh, so is it moments like these, nothing works. Leanne asked, what are the differences between practitioner grade supplements and mass market supplements in light of the current economic times? Is it better to have something rather than nothing, or concentrate on specific areas? That's another excellent question. It's one that I get asked all the time, and it's slightly complicated answer, I suppose. one of the problems with supplements is that supplements tend to be synthetic. So whether they are practitioner grade or whether they are, over the counter, they are synthetic. They are what somebody has decided should go together in whatever order and quantities to prevent a deficiency, for example. And if we go back to the work of one of the greatest nutritionists of all time, Dr. Royal Lee, Dr. Lee emphasized to us that vitamins aren't chemicals. They are compounds. They are biological mechanisms that all work together. And he really wanted us to focus on getting our nutrients from food, which I think is a great first place, but obviously we can't always. And then if we can't, then try and get our nutrients from food-based supplements. So these are things like the organ supplements. Janet Stoke from Homegrown Primal in Christchurch sells, and I know there are probably other places around New Zealand as well. So these are really good organ supplements, and other countries have their versions of them. Vitamin C, you get food-based sources of vitamin C rather than taking just ascorbic acid, because ascorbic acid and a vitamin C complex are not the same thing. Ascorbic in a vitamin C, you have ascorbic acid shell inside the middle. You have all the other things like, your copper and your P factors and your J factors and all your polyphenols and all these things, and they all help make the vitamin C work properly. And this is one of the reasons why when we look at the research into vitamin supplementation and disease, we see that vitamin deficiencies are associated with poor health and disease, but giving supplements doesn't necessarily reverse it. And that's one of the main problems. And then the quality of the supplements makes a difference. So the thing with practitioner grade supplements, the kind that I have access to, is that they undergo really rigorous testing. They undergo clinical trials, and they have to prove that what they say in them is in them. And, with the therapeutics bill coming, that's going to get even more rigid and more strict, that we have to be able to prove that what we say is in them and that their mechanism of action works. And we don't have that with over-the-counter supplements. Over-the-counter supplements can just have a tiny amount of the active ingredient in them. And often they don't have ingredients that are very biologically absorbable by our bodies. So, or ingredients that may actually do harm. So if we look at folic acid and folate and all the work that's come out on the need to supplement with folate, not folic acid, and, sort of the problems that come with folic acid supplementation. B12 is another one. You have cyanocobalamin, but, you may need like methylcobalamin or another form of vitamin B12 to be able to be absorbed and be used. Vitamin A is another example. Low-grade supplements will have beta-carotene and very poor ability to convert into the retinol that our body actually needs. So we have a look on the back of these things and we see all these vitamins and minerals and we think, oh, that'll do us, that'll be our insurance policy, but often it's not our insurance policy. So Leanne's question was, I get it, cost of living, times are expensive, supplements are expensive. Is it worthwhile buying cheaper supplements? Is that better than nothing? And basically my answer to that is no, I don't think it is better than nothing. If it was me personally, I wouldn't bother. I'd save my money. I'd rather spend the money buying, a piece of really good steak or a piece of really nice fish or something, which is probably going to be a lot healthier for me in the long run. And I say that because I've seen so many of my clients take, supplements from the supermarket or over-the-counter supplements, or even things like the fish oils, those are very fragile and they need to be treated really carefully. And I know when I've walked down the streets in Rotorua and I've seen like stacks and stacks of fish oil out on the pavement and the hot sun's beating down on it, and they've probably been driving around in the back of the truck for goodness knows how long. And there's no respect for how fragile those fish oils are, and how oxidized they'll get and rancid they'll become. And there's no value in buying them, and they'll be selling them off to you really cheap, 2 for the price of 1. But your body's probably better off without them. And then the other, supplement I want to talk about a bit is magnesium. So everybody knows, or, lots of people know that they need magnesium. It's one of the most common deficiencies I find when I'm doing my blood tests. And people will say, I'm taking it, but then they'll come out with a container that's full of magnesium oxide or some other form of magnesium that is very poorly bioavailable, and it's not really getting where it needs to go and to do its job. So I think, if you're going to spend money on them, spend that little bit more and do get practitioner grade supplements if you possibly can. Great question. Thanks, Leanne. Next question. Next question is quite a complicated, tricky one. It was an email I got from John. I'm not going to read out the whole email, but I'll just summarize it a little bit. So John has an 18-year-old daughter who has been vegetarian for about 9 months, and she's now turned vegan, and he's quite worried about her. He said he feels that her mental health has decreased a bit. He thinks she might be a bit stressed and overwhelmed and slightly depressed. Her moods, she's got lots of mood swings and things like that. And he wanted to know, how can he get more protein and iron into her because her energy is low? And he just wondered if I had any ideas how he could get her to go back to eating meat and animal foods. And this is really, really challenging, because for those of us who know and who have done our research and have looked into it, we know that animal foods are superior. But you're never, ever going to convince a vegan of that. They have to come to that on their own. They've got to figure it out. And I've got some podcasts with some ex-vegetarians and vegans. Rachel Thompson is one that you can go and have a look at. And Rachel did her vegan diet really well. Like, she was so focused on eating well, but eventually she just felt she had to eat meat. And during the COVID lockdown, she just had this enormous urge to eat meat. And then she returned to eating meat and improved a lot of the health conditions that she had. But when she was a vegan and, she consulted with me, there was no way she was going to eat meat. She just couldn't bring herself to it. And I didn't try and force her or convince her otherwise, because I know people have to make those decisions on their own. John, if you could get your daughter back to eating some eggs, that would be really beneficial, and maybe some dairy if she can tolerate it. So that would be really helpful. But I think the first thing to ask or find out or gently have a conversation about is what is behind the veganism. Now, often people will say they don't like animals being killed, and climate change is another one. And again, we could dive into those subjects, and we know that they're not really, there's a lot of debate about the accuracy of those. In terms of animals being killed, we know that animals get killed to eat a plant-based diet as well as an animal-based diet. But those arguments aren't really going to wash with your daughter. So I think you should really delve into what lies behind her feelings. I remember when I was young and at her age, and, a whole lot of previous trauma and a whole lot of stuff going on, you have real low body image. And so sometimes I think for some of these young girls and young women, it's about wanting to lose weight. And even if you're skinny, and even if you don't look like you need to lose weight, that doesn't mean that up in here, you don't think that you do. That doesn't. And it's really hard to explain that to someone, but it's all part of our negative self-talk, our low self-esteem. So I think diving into finding out, does she have a weight issue? You didn't mention whether she did or not. And even if she doesn't, is some of this about losing weight, being more attractive, trying to be prettier to herself so that she feels that she can love and value herself better if she was a bit skinnier? There's so much social pressure out there now. So I think that would be one area to look at. Then the next thing would be, if you can get her to eat eggs and some dairy, that would be very helpful. And then, like we were talking about before, we do want some good fats into her. So this is where I would say, get her eating avocados, do use some olive oil in her diet. You can use coconut oil because that's a plant-based oil. So those things can be really helpful. In terms of supplements, she won't want to do organ supplements. So I would suggest something like bee pollen or something like that, if she can tolerate it, so that you've got a food-based supplement to help. She will need vitamin B12 without eating a animal-based diet. Vitamin B12 is really problematic. There's no vitamin B12 in plant foods, so she'll need some kind of vitamin B12 supplementation. And I'd support her. I'd say to her, hey, that's fine. I totally support it. I understand, you're making these choices for yourself. Help her concentrate on getting a whole food vegan diet rather than a processed food vegan diet, because they do come in different forms. And a vegan diet doesn't mean just not eating animal foods. And we do see a lot where people will just give up animal foods, but they're still just eating processed foods. So they're eating a whole lot of kind of processed junk, and they don't lose weight, their health deteriorates, become really nutrient deficient. So that would be some of my suggestions there. And then maybe just say to her, hey, why don't we get a few blood tests done? Let's just have a look at where you're at nutrient-wise. And then in 6 months, let's do it again. Just humor your old dad. Let's do it again. And let's just make sure that you're healthy, so that while you're doing this diet, you're healthy, and, I love you and I care about you. And if this is what you want to do, I will support you, but I'd just like to make sure you're healthy on the journey. Anyway, it was a great question, and thank you for asking it. And it's a real tricky one to answer. And then the last question, which just see that that's just been coming to me. Hang on, let me just go and find that one. Oh, the last question was about exercise for weight loss. So we talked about that a little bit last week. I think it was last week that we talked about exercise for weight loss. And I made the point that exercise for health is different than exercise for performance. And so don't get muddled up between, running a marathon or doing a half marathon or something to try and lose weight and thinking that that is necessarily healthy. So you can go back and check on last week's video if you want to. The other part of that is, as I said last week, there are lots of different aspects to how our body moves that are really important. So we need mobility, we need flexibility, we need our hearts to be able to, pump properly. So we need good heart and lung capacity, and then we need muscle strength. So I think when you're looking at exercise, rather than just worrying about what's going to burn the most calories so that the scale weight will come down, because you're going to find that it's not really going to help that much, really focus on what's going to improve the quality of your life. And each exercise has its own benefits. So cardiovascular exercise will burn some calories while you're doing it, and it will increase your heart rate, and it will help with your cardiovascular fitness. But once you stop doing it, you stop burning the calories. When you do strength training, muscular training, you don't burn as many calories while you're doing it, but you burn more calories for a longer period of time. So I think balancing both of those is really important. And like I said last week, go and find a good trainer, go and find someone who you can talk to, who can help you sort out a program, and be prepared to change a program and switch it around quite a bit. All right, I don't know if I have got any more questions. Doesn't look like there are any more questions there. And looks like somebody did comment. Hang on, I don't know how to find that. Comments. I think there was a comment, but it seems to have gone. One comment. Okay. All right. Well, I apologize if someone has asked a question and I can't find it. I'm finding this technology a bit challenging. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching, and next week will be my last live, such good chance to get your last questions, and I look forward to answering those. Thanks very much. Bye.